Anyway, shall we jump into this week's week 4 of our top 5 all-time power forwards in the NBA? I've lost track. Who's going first?
Oh no. I almost feel like it's you, maybe. I don't know.
Rock, paper, scissors. Ready? Like, I can't even see what you're doing. You gotta hold your fist up.
I got a better way of doing it. What we'll do is, no, I don't know actually. Jeez. Oh, you know what? I'll go first just to cut the content.
Fine. But before you start, I just want to put a footnote. I reckon this was the hardest group since the point guards. Like, I think we're gonna have some differences here. I really think that. But look, I'm all ears. What's your number 5?
Well, I'm going to just chime in on that. I think number 1 we'll agree on, and I don't think anything else we'll agree on. And I think the rationale will be quite interesting on this. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to preface things with the power forwards felt like a couple of tiers, like greatness with championship rings and individual success. And then there were asterisks on both of those things, respectively. I think that's what I'd preface all of my arguments with, that some rings meant more than others, and some individual accolades meant more than others. So
it was quite an interesting group. I think a lot of power forwards that were great, I guess, didn't really win that many rings. That was probably something that was interesting as I was working through these names and trying to order them in a way that that I guess I thought, how I saw it, I guess. So anyway.
Yeah, not a staple position, it seems. Every other position, there's been some pretty great players there, but here it was a little bit trickier. So number 5, I have went with Kevin Garnett. Obviously, the one championship was won in Boston. The reason why this championship weighs a little bit lower, it's one of those team-up ones. And he played a role, and it was a good role that he played. But, his peak powers, the 24 and 14 in Minnesota and 5 assists, that wasn't who he was when they won the championship. And as great as he was individually and the success that he had in a team environment, I don't think those two things ran parallel. It's probably very similar to the Scottie Pippen stuff as well, where I think he was a massive component of the championship team, but the individual talent maybe just wasn't at the par that we wanted from other people.
KG's on my list. He's not my number 5. Obviously, he's a little bit higher on my list, actually. At number 5, I have the Worm, Dennis Rodman.
Oh, okay. All right. The first time I don't think we've got. Yeah, okay. All right, keep going. Sorry.
Wake you up a bit, is it? 5 rings, 2 with the Pistons, 3 with the Bulls. Obviously, a rebounding machine, 18, 17, 16 rebounds, 15 rebounds, multiple seasons. The only reason why he's probably not high is that he's always been a role player, I guess. Definitely not a focal point on offense, but, a glue guy. Definitely a glue guy on those sort of championship winning teams, and a huge personality, obviously, for the NBA as well back then. And I guess, he was, without him, again, you'd sort of have to go, were those teams in Detroit and ultimately the second three-peat Bulls, would they have won 3 in a row without Dennis Rodman? And the answer is probably it would have been much harder for them to have won 3 in a row without him. So he's at number 5 for me.
You've really flipped the script on all-time great. I think if we were doing a conversation about like greatest impact or role players, he's definitely up there. I guess my interpretation of an all-time great is if you put this player on a franchise and ask them to lead you a certain direction, Dennis Rodman doesn't make that list for me at all. But, and it's similar to the Manu Ginobili pick, earlier on as well. I just think individually that's where this all-time great stuff comes in. But it's good content for the 4 people who watch this, so that's great. I went with number 4. So this is where the lack of championship, but the individual success overrode what I ended up doing. So I've actually went with Charles Barkley at number 4. Obviously the rebounding machine, peak powers where he was averaging, 28 and 11 or 12 respectively. Probably one of those players that really just boils down to maybe never lived up to all of the potential that they should have, but did have success, maybe not as much success in Philadelphia, but did join that Phoenix team and ended up, getting a real puncher's chance against the Bulls there. And, even in a sense in Houston, tried to put a bit of a super team together there and didn't figure it out, but it is what it is. And yeah, again, that same logic of if I put him on a team versus putting KG on a team, I feel like he's going to have more impact than KG can.
Be honest, yeah. Did Barkley get some Suns bias?
I think when you factor in the fact that he joined a team and that team instantly went to the finals, it has to be a factor. And I think he played very well. I think he came up against the Bulls. It's the same conversation we've had multiple times now. If Michael Jordan doesn't exist in a parallel universe, Charles Barkley has a championship. No ifs, buts, or maybes about it.
Well, look, Charles Barkley was one of my last cuts. He's not in my top 5.
All right.
In fact, I don't know about whether you'll have Karl Malone in your top 5. He was one of my last cuts too. I don't have Karl Malone in my top 5. And those two players fell in the category why they got cut out of my top 5 is because they never won a ring. Don't get me wrong. They were really great players, all-stars for multiple seasons. Mailman's second on the all-time scoring, I think. And got a lot of buckets, and obviously Barkley got to 1 finals, Malone got to 2, but no ring, still no ring. So I guess look, Barkley's deserving to be in the conversation, but at number 4, I have a Boston great. Obviously played the 4 along Larry Bird last week we covered, I guess, along with obviously a deep Boston team. And I was looking at his obviously career. And I didn't really realize this. I probably did actually know back in my head, but obviously he spent his whole career in Boston. So Kevin Mchale, I had it as number 4, 3 rings, I think, as well with Boston. And obviously it was a bit of a super team, I think, back then in the 80s for that Boston team. I watched a little bit of grainy footage, and I was like, obviously looking at his stats here, he's definitely got some, numbers that sort of back that up. It was funny. I was actually trying to watch some footage on Bob Petit, who was obviously, in the conversation when you're sort of looking online at lists for all-time sort of power forwards. And it was interesting. I guess it was a whole nother era then where I guess you can't compare with how basketball is played nowadays. It's like you'd feel like if those players played nowadays, they'd get swallowed up. They probably wouldn't even have a career. But that's how the evolution of the game goes, I guess. But anyway, I got Kevin Mchale at number 4.
It's a good pick. I think the reason why it doesn't make the list, I think the way that I've approached these lists is that concept of if I put this player as a franchise player, how does it go? And Kevin Mchale, definitely part of the super team. It falls in the same category as the Dennis Rodman, the Draymond Greens, the Manu Ginobili's, like a part of greatness.
I put Scottie Pippen much higher than you would have, correct?
Correct. Yes, because Scottie Pippen as well. So I think that, perhaps the way that I'm interpreting this great all-time list is that, number 1 option, that alpha person. And, Kevin Mchale wasn't that. It was a fantastic low post threat, but a component of a very strong team, not necessarily the component. And I think, you can make a case and say as well, like, the lack of flash in the game. But you know what? Also, this position seems doomed for a lack of flash. With number 3, I did give credit to Karl Malone. Obviously had, an incredible individual career, getting, second all-time in points, longevity as well, quite underrated. But as a big man, with the kind of game that they played, especially in the era, he got close to 1,500 games. Even on the ring chasing Lakers to a degree, he averaged 14 and 9 essentially. And that, there's players in the current NBA that get paid a lot of money just to do that. And, that was when he was at a significantly reduced role. One of the reasons why he sits over Charles Barkley is I think it's a better individual accolade career, especially again coming up against the Jordan factor. But the reason why he wouldn't eclipse any further is he might be the case of if he didn't have John Stockton, how different is the career? And I think it's also why I penalized John Stockton a little bit as well, because putting Karl Malone on his own team, I think he would have figured it out. But how much better is he because of the situation that he ended up in?
Well, I'll definitely agree that Malone probably should be above Barkley. That's probably pretty easy to argue. But yeah, look, obviously, like I covered before, Malone was a hard cut, just like Barkley was sort of one of my final cuts too. But number 3, I got a German, 20 seasons with the Mavs, with a ring. maybe a bit of a surprise ring, but he did get the ring after obviously the disappointment, with the first try, I think. And obviously Dirk is number 3 for me. He also, I guess, a big part, of Dirk's game, and when he arrived, really sort of changed the way the 4 played. Really stretched the floor, shot the 3. Sort of really played away from the basket with his sort of, moved away from that back to that basket game, sort of low post game, that sort of, what was it, like that step back that he had, that, the fadeaway, one leg fadeaway. Yeah, Dirk fade, yeah. So those sort of moves, and obviously, in prime Dirk obviously was, averaging, 25, 26 points a game, with the MVP obviously, and the ring. That's why I got him number 3.
I always love these natural segues because he's my number 2. So obviously the championship gets him over players like Karl Malone and Charles Barkley, who maybe individually did have better accolades. And the reason why he goes over Kevin Garnett, like significantly, is the fact that he actually did it. The team that was put around him, it was a real mismatch sort of team, very similar to the 04 Pistons, where, it just clicked at the right time because, Sean Marion was kind of past it, Jason Kidd was kind of past it, Jason Terry, was at the tail end of it, same for Dirk. And it just worked for them. Revolutionized the game in terms of big shooting, but, he revolutionized it in a time that, he still shot 38% from 3. And there are players in the current NBA that still can't do that. And, it's, defensively, he's not as bad as people ping him for. He was slow and he was, not very agile, but he could still do what he needed to do. And, there was a big, I'm looking at the basketball reference here from 2000 until 2012. It's 20 plus points a game at, 7 foot tall. And that's another thing. There's a lot of 7-footers that get 6 years to 8 years out of their career, and then it kind of really falls apart really quickly. And, Chris Stapps is a good example of another Mav that it just didn't work on. And considering I think he tore his Achilles and still came back as well, basically made that franchise very similar to a Giannis narrative. Yeah, it's all good. Which was another thing. Giannis didn't appear on our small forward list, and like I was almost thinking, it's like, was it too soon? But it's probably a post.
Giannis is not a small forward. Giannis has never been a small forward. Chris, maybe in his rookie season they tried to play him at the 3, but
I want to see what the position says, because I feel like
that's why Middleton plays the 3 clearly, and has been since he arrived.
No,
I guess.
You're correct. Okay, all right. You know what? Good conversation. So in his career, he's now played 9 seasons, 5 of which are at power forward. The rest were at scattered positions. One of the seasons he started at point guard, according to this. So, Giannis, right? I'm curious. Maybe Giannis is on your list. Maybe that's the surprise, because I'm really struggling to figure out.
The Greek freak is number 2. All right, he is number 2 on my list, and I actually seriously considered him as number 1. I seriously consider him as number 1. And just bring up his stats here. Not only this season, obviously 29 points at the moment, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, 1.5 blocks, and a steal. He's a beast, and everyone knows that. That's why he's a Greek freak, right? He's a 2-time MVP. He's got the ring now, and he's going to get another ring at some point. That's the reality. He's going to get another ring at some point, unless he gets injured. Okay. And I actually picked the Bucks this year, so I'm saying he's going to get another ring this season. Okay, he's going back to back. But hey, that's another conversation. Okay. But I think he's I think also with that Defensive Player of the Year award. Okay, he's an all-time talent. Okay, and he's still got time to move up this list, and I've already got him at 2, obviously. But he could, and more likely than not, will probably be the greatest power forward of all time for at least a while.
I mean, definitely fits the bill that I'm looking for in terms of pick a player, put him on a team. Can he be a franchise player? Definitely that. Obviously had the first 3 years where he was kind of finding his footing of who he was as a player. The jump shot's still developing.
He doesn't need a jump shot. He doesn't need a jump shot.
The only thing would be, right, he is going to have to slow down. That's just what naturally happens. Like, he's still got another 4 or 5 years of like banging towards the ring and hoping that everything works, but he will have to get some form of low post game that slows down a bit, and that's just how aging has to occur in the NBA. And it's why Dirk was able to have the career that he did, because he was a shooter and he could do the low post move constantly. It's a good pick. I think it felt too soon to put him on a top 5 list for me. But it was a debate sort of thing. So I'm glad that at least one of us did it.
I think if you just sort of look in retrospect of the names we've mentioned so far, And obviously Malone and Barkley, their careers are finished. They're done. Okay. And I think I clearly make the argument that Giannis has achieved more than them already, and he's still going. Okay. And obviously, he hasn't scored as many points as Karl Malone or anything like that yet, at this point. But, where he'll end up on that list, who knows? If he keeps going at this sort of rate, he'll probably be top 10, obviously when it's all said and done. But I think that's sort of how I looked at it. And that's why I made those cuts and why I had Giannis at 2.
That's a good point. I mean, his career averages right now sit at 21.6, but when he's averaging 29 in a season, that career average will slowly increase. And so, for a player that came into the league averaging 6.8, and now he essentially averages 3 times that, that's great. I think number 1, we both mutually agree on. We're going with Tim Duncan, I would assume.
I'm gonna give you a stat here because you like stats. Here's a fun fact, Nick. According to StatMuse, Tim Duncan played 10 seasons at the center position and only 9 at the power forward. Tim Duncan is not on my list because he's a center, as far as I'm concerned. And especially in the later part of his career, he played center for the last 10 seasons of his Spurs career. Do you want to change your mind now? You want to change your pick right now?
No. I'm going to stick. Okay, here's the reason why I'm going to stick with it. We look at his last season in San Antonio, for example. He played 61 games, which was the lowest of his career. That isn't inclusive of the 50 games in 1999 because of the lockout. And he played how many minutes per game? 25 minutes per game, right? I think his peak career in terms of when he was the most influential was at the power forward position, right? Because essentially it was a tail end of his career, right? The Spurs won the championship in 2014, and then basically he was still there. I think look, you know what? He's one of those flips, right? It's the same as the Hakeem Olajuwon. Hakeem Olajuwon could have been, flipped as well. Patrick Ewing.
Flipped as what? What do you mean flipped? Like
as a power forward center, like they could play.
When was Hakeem ever a power forward? Hakeem and Patrick Ewing were never power forward.
When Ralph Sampson played on the Rockets, Hakeem would not have been the center in that position.
I obviously, like I said, Tim Duncan. I considered him, and then I went and did some stat searching, and the stats told me simply he was more a center than a forward. So obviously, I took him out of my list. Clearly now I have some thinking to figure out where he slots into the all-time centers list, because obviously he's an all-time great, no doubt. But obviously at number 1, I felt a bit insulted that you put KG at number 5. All right, because I got KG at number 1, and let me explain why. I think, and obviously we've got different opinions. I've obviously sort of favored. I think rings do weigh heavily with me. Okay, clearly some of your picks haven't had that so much weight put on rings. I think you've also sort of focused a lot on moments in a career. Okay, so obviously, KG obviously went to Boston after many seasons at the T-Wolves. And yes, he did join obviously Paul Pierce and Ray Allen, and they got that ring, sort of finally for him in that sort of sense. But KG, as a power forward, came straight out of high school. Okay, he was Giannis. Okay, back then. Okay, he was Giannis back then. Some of these stats here, looking for KG, he was averaging, obviously double digits in rebounds. Even Dirk wasn't averaging double digits in rebounds. Okay, so 12, 13 rebounds a game, along with like 5, 6 assists, and that was unheard of back then as a 4 to sort of average over 5 assists a game. Along with, KG's best season was about 2.2 blocks a game. He was averaging for his career about 1.5 blocks a game, along with about 1.5 steals a game. Okay, these are things that Dirk never did. Okay, so Dirk's got those buckets. He had that sweet jump shot. He made the 3. He stretched the floor, and so on and so forth. But KG was a beast. All right, for many seasons, and ultimately he took the T-Wolves, which have been terrible since and were terrible before him, okay, to the Western Conference Finals. Okay, and ultimately you can make the argument here that KG was a victim of poor management. And many players have fallen into that, that obviously he never had those sort of in his prime, especially when he was putting up all these numbers with the Timberwolves, that he had the right players around him to obviously maybe grab a ring there, and obviously that's then he would have had two. But then obviously when he went to Boston, I think a key part here is that Barkley went to Phoenix and joined a really deep squad then, and unfortunately ran to Jordan. Malone had the right pieces around him, and all these great players had right pieces or good pieces around them at points, but none of them, well, not all of them, sorry, was guaranteed a ring. Okay, it doesn't mean that KG just goes to Boston and they're guaranteed a ring because there's other good players there. And the reality here is that like LeBron's got rings because of D Wade and Bosh. MJ's got rings because of Pippen and Rodman and these other players around him. That's the whole reality. So you sort of mentioned that obviously you felt KG shouldn't have been rated or listed any higher because you felt that he wasn't deserving because he joined that sort of successful team. But I think it's more so that he was a core element of that successful team. Without KG in Boston don't have that ring. Just because they got Paul Pierce and Ray Allen, they don't have a ring there. All right, KG was the key to getting that ring and Boston winning. I don't know how many titles they got now, but obviously that one they picked up there against Kobe in his prime as well at that point.